The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Marcus Chen's small restaurant kitchen, casting golden streaks across the worn wooden counters. Steam rose gently from a pot of simmering broth, filling the air with the warm scent of herbs and slow-cooked vegetables. Marcus moved with quiet precision, his hands working automatically as he prepared for another day at his neighborhood bistro, Chen's Corner. It was barely 6 in the morning, but Marcus had been awake for over an hour. This was his routine, rising before dawn to prep ingredients, check supplies, and steal a few precious moments of silence before the day truly began. His 3-year-old daughter Emma was still asleep upstairs in their small apartment above the restaurant, her curly auburn hair spread across her pillow like autumn leaves. Marcus paused in his chopping to glance at the baby monitor on the counter. The soft sound of Emma's breathing came through the speaker, steady and peaceful. A small smile crossed his weathered face. She was his world, his reason for everything. When Emma's mother had left 2 years ago, claiming she wasn't ready for the responsibility of parenthood, Marcus had felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. But looking at his daughter's sleeping form each morning reminded him that some broken things could be rebuilt stronger. The restaurant wasn't much to look at from the outside. Tucked between a used bookstore and a small flower shop on Maple Street, it had faded blue paint and a hand-painted sign that Marcus had made himself. Inside, mismatched chairs surrounded 12 tables, each one carefully cleaned and set with simple white napkins and mason jar glasses. The walls were decorated with Emma's artwork, colorful finger paintings and crayon drawings that customers often complimented. Marcus had never intended to be a chef. Before Emma was born, he had worked as an accountant, spending his days buried in spreadsheets and financial reports. But when he became a single father, everything changed. He needed flexible hours, needed to be present for his daughter. The small inheritance from his grandmother had been just enough to lease this space and transform it into something beautiful. Cooking had always been his refuge. As a child, he had learned to make simple meals from his immigrant parents, who worked long hours at the textile factory. The kitchen was where his mother shared stories of their homeland, where his father taught him that food was love made visible. Now, every dish Marcus created carried those lessons forward. The bell above the front door chimed softly, and Marcus looked up from his prep work. His first customer of the day was Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who came in every Tuesday and Thursday for his homemade soup and a cup of chamomile tea. "Morning, Mrs. Rodriguez," Marcus called out, wiping his hands on his apron. "The usual today," she nodded, settling into her favorite table by the window. "You're such a good boy, Marcus. That little girl of yours is lucky to have you." As Marcus ladled the soup into a bowl, he thought about luck. Was Emma lucky? He wondered sometimes if she missed having a mother, if his love was enough to fill that gap. He did his best, reading bedtime stories in different voices, braiding her hair even though his fingers were clumsy with the small strands, teaching her to crack eggs without making a mess. The morning passed quietly with the regular flow of customers. Mr. Peterson picked up his weekly order of Marcus's famous lasagna. The college students from the nearby campus grabbed coffee and pastries before their early classes. Sarah, who ran the bookstore next door, stopped in for her daily dose of Marcus's special blend coffee and one of his homemade muffins. Around 10:30, Marcus heard Emma stirring on the baby monitor. Soon, she would pad down the stairs in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes and asking for breakfast with Daddy. It was Marcus's favorite part of the day. But today would be different. The sound that came through the monitor wasn't Emma's usual gentle awakening. It was crying, the kind of desperate, inconsolable wailing that every parent recognizes as distress. Marcus dropped his spatula and rushed toward the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He found Emma sitting up in her small bed, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. Her forehead felt warm against his palm, and she was clutching her stomach. "Tummy hurts, Daddy," she whispered between sobs. "Hurts so much." Marcus felt his heart clench. Emma rarely cried like this. She was usually his brave little soldier, facing scrapes and bumps with determined resilience. But now she looked so small, so vulnerable in her yellow pajamas with the dancing bears. He scooped her into his arms, feeling her tiny body tremble against his chest. Her temperature was definitely elevated, not dangerously high, but enough to cause discomfort. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Had she eaten something that disagreed with her? Was it the stomach bug that had been going around her daycare? "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured, carrying her downstairs to the kitchen. "Daddy's going to make it better." Marcus set Emma in the small chair he kept behind the counter for her, wrapping her in the soft blanket she carried everywhere. She continued to cry, though more quietly now, her little hands pressed against her stomach. Several customers looked over with concern, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of single parenthood, the constant awareness that every decision rested solely on his shoulders. He closed the restaurant's front door, flipping the sign to "Back in 10 minutes," and focused entirely on his daughter. In his mind, he sorted through everything he knew about childhood stomach ailments, everything his own mother had done when he was sick as a boy. The memory came to him slowly, like sunlight breaking through morning fog. His grandmother's congee, a simple rice porridge that she had made whenever anyone in the family felt unwell. She had called it comfort in a bowl, and claimed it could cure everything from heartbreak to the common cold. Marcus had never made it for Emma before, but suddenly he could smell it as clearly as if his grandmother were standing beside him. The gentle aroma of rice slowly breaking down in seasoned broth, the way steam would curl up from the bowl like prayers rising to heaven. He moved quickly but calmly, putting a pot of water on the stove and adding a cup of jasmine rice. Emma's crying had subsided to occasional hiccups, but she watched him with large, trusting eyes. Marcus talked to her as he cooked, his voice soft and steady. "Daddy's making you something very special, Em. It's a recipe from great-grandma Chen, from before Daddy was even born. She used to make it for me when I was little and my tummy felt icky." As the rice began to soften and break apart, Marcus added a careful amount of chicken broth he kept simmering throughout each day. The liquid turned creamy and white, taking on the consistency of a thick soup. He seasoned it lightly with white pepper and a tiny pinch of salt, then stirred in some finely minced ginger. Emma had stopped crying entirely now, mesmerized by her father's movements. There was something hypnotic about the way he stirred the pot, how he tasted and adjusted, how his entire being focused on creating something that would make her feel better. Marcus tested the temperature carefully, blowing on a small spoonful until it was just warm enough to be comforting but not hot enough to burn. He sat beside Emma and offered her the first taste. She took it hesitantly, then her eyes widened slightly. "It's good, Daddy. Easy on your tummy too, sweetheart. Just like great-grandma promised." As Emma slowly ate the congee, her color began to return. The flush in her cheeks faded to a healthy pink, and she started chatting about the book they had read the night before. Marcus felt the familiar surge of relief that came with successfully navigating a parenting challenge, but also something deeper, a connection to his family's history, to the generations of love that had been passed down through recipes and gentle care. He was so absorbed in watching Emma eat that he didn't notice the woman standing at his locked front door until she knocked gently on the glass. Marcus looked up to see an elegantly dressed woman in her early 30s, with shoulder-length blonde hair and eyes that seemed to carry a weight of sadness. She was wearing an expensive-looking coat and held a small purse clutched tightly in her manicured hands. When their eyes met through the glass, she pointed to her own eyes and then to Emma, a universal gesture asking if the child was all right. Something about her expression, the genuine concern mixed with what looked like longing, made Marcus stand and unlock the door. "I'm sorry, we're closed right now," he began, but she shook her head quickly. "I don't need food," she said, her voice cultured but trembling slightly. I saw the little girl crying, and I wondered if everything was okay. I have a daughter myself, and I know how scary it can be when they're not feeling well." Marcus found himself stepping aside to let her in, though he couldn't quite explain why. There was something about this woman that felt familiar, though he was certain they had never met. "She's better now," Marcus said, gesturing toward Emma, who was happily finishing her congee. "Just a stomach ache. I made her some congee. It's a rice porridge my grandmother used to make." The woman's eyes filled with tears so suddenly that Marcus felt alarmed. She pressed a hand to her mouth, staring at Emma with an expression of raw pain that made Marcus's chest tight with sympathy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's just, she looks so content. So loved. I haven't seen my own daughter in 6 months." Marcus felt his protective instincts flare. Was this woman a threat? But looking at her face, he saw only grief and regret, the kind of pain that comes from choices that can't be undone. "Would you like to sit down?" he offered gently. "I could make you some tea." She nodded gratefully and took a seat at the table nearest to Emma. Marcus busied himself with preparing chamomile tea, stealing glances at this mysterious woman who had appeared at his door. She watched Emma with the intensity of someone memorizing details, as if she were afraid the image might disappear. "What's your daughter's name?" Marcus asked quietly, setting the steaming mug before her. "Lily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's 3, just like yours, I think. She has dark hair, like her father's, and the most beautiful laugh." her hands wrapped around the warm mug as if seeking comfort. I haven't heard it in so long. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. This woman was like Emma's mother, someone who had walked away from their child. But unlike Emma's mother, this woman seemed to regret her choice deeply. What happened? Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from her. I thought I wasn't good enough, she said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. My ex-husband has everything: money, stability, family support. I was working 18-hour days trying to build my company, missing bedtimes, missing school events. When our marriage fell apart, I convinced myself that Lily would be better off without me. That he could give her things I couldn't. Emma had finished her congee and was now coloring quietly at the counter, occasionally glancing over at the crying woman with the curious concern that children often show for adult emotions. But watching you with your daughter just now, the woman continued, the way you knew exactly what she needed, how you made something so simple but so full of love. I realized that what children really need isn't money or fancy things. They need presence. They need someone who will drop everything to make them feel better. Marcus thought about his own journey as a single parent, the doubts that plagued him on difficult days. It's not always easy, he said honestly. There are times I wonder if I'm enough, if I'm making the right choices. But showing up, that's the most important thing. Being there when they need you. The woman nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue from her purse. I told myself I was being noble, staying away so I wouldn't disrupt her life. But really, I was just scared. Scared of not being perfect, scared of making mistakes. All parents make mistakes, Marcus said gently. The good ones learn from them and try again. Emma had wandered over to their table, her coloring book clutched in her small hands. She looked up at the woman with the direct gaze that only children possess. Why are you sad? Emma asked, her voice soft but clear. The woman looked down at Emma with wonder, as if she were seeing a miracle. I miss my little girl, she said simply. She's about your age, and I love her very much, but I haven't seen her in a long time. Emma considered this with the seriousness that 3-year-olds bring to important matters. Then she tore out one of her coloring pages, a picture of a rainbow with careful crayon marks inside most of the lines, and handed it to the woman. For your little girl, Emma said. So she knows you're thinking about her. The woman took the picture with trembling hands, fresh tears spilling over. Thank you, sweetheart. This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. Marcus felt his own eyes grow moist watching this interaction. His daughter, still recovering from her stomach ache, had instinctively reached out to comfort a stranger in pain. It was a moment that captured everything he hoped to teach her about kindness and compassion. What's your name? Marcus asked the woman. Victoria, she said, still staring at Emma's drawing. Victoria Ashford. Marcus recognized the name immediately. Victoria Ashford was the founder and CEO of Ashford Industries, a tech company that had been featured on magazine covers and business news shows. She was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, one of the youngest female billionaires in the country. And yet here she sat in his humble restaurant, crying over a child's crayon drawing. The congee, Victoria said suddenly, looking up at Marcus. Would it be possible for you to write down the recipe? I'd like to learn to make it for Lily, if I get the chance. Marcus nodded and moved to find a piece of paper. As he wrote down his grandmother's recipe, he found himself adding notes about technique, about the importance of stirring gently and tasting frequently. But more than that, he wrote about intention, how food made with love carried a different energy than food made simply for sustenance. When he handed Victoria the recipe, she read it carefully, her lips moving silently over the words. Then she folded it reverently and placed it in her purse. Thank you, she said, standing to leave. Both of you, you've given me something I didn't even know I needed. What will you do? Marcus asked. Victoria looked out the window at the busy street beyond, where people hurried past with their own stories of love and loss. I'm going to call my lawyer, she said finally. And then I'm going to call my ex-husband. It's time to stop being afraid of not being perfect and start trying to be present. She knelt down to Emma's level, her expensive coat pooling around her on the floor. Thank you for the beautiful picture, Emma. I'm going to treasure it always. Emma beamed and gave Victoria an impulsive hug, the kind of open-hearted gesture that children offer so freely. Victoria held her for just a moment, her eyes closed, as if she were trying to memorize the feeling of small arms around her neck. After Victoria left, Marcus and Emma settled into their usual afternoon routine. Emma helped him prepare vegetables for the evening service, standing on her small stool and carefully sorting herbs while telling him elaborate stories about the adventures of her stuffed animals. The restaurant filled again with the familiar sounds of daily life, the gentle clatter of plates, the murmur of conversation, the hiss of food cooking on the stove. But Marcus found himself thinking about Victoria throughout the day. He wondered about her daughter Lily, about the father who was raising her alone. He thought about the courage it would take to reach out after 6 months of absence, the vulnerability required to admit that fear had masqueraded as sacrifice. 2 weeks later, Marcus was preparing for the lunch rush when a familiar figure appeared at his door. Victoria stood outside, but she wasn't alone. A small girl with dark hair and serious brown eyes held her hand, both of them peering through the glass with nervous anticipation. Marcus opened the door with a smile. "Victoria, and you must be Lily." Lily nodded solemnly, staying close to her mother's side. Victoria looked different, less polished, more authentic. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, and her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail. But most notably, she looked lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "We were hoping," Victoria said, her voice uncertain, "that maybe you could teach us how to make congee. Lily's been asking about the rice soup ever since I told her about meeting you and Emma." Emma appeared from behind the counter, drawn by the sound of new voices. When she saw Lily, her face lit up with the pure joy that children feel when they meet a potential friend. "Do you want to see my coloring books?" Emma asked Lily directly. "Daddy says we can color while he cooks." Lily looked up at Victoria for permission, and when her mother nodded encouragingly, she smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant. As the girls settled at a table with crayons and paper, Marcus and Victoria worked side by side in the kitchen. He guided her